Yesterday he backed him. Today he sacked him over his links to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. We will cover all the fallout from Keir Starmer's decision to fire Lord Mandelson as the UK ambassador to Washington on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Chris at Westminster.
And we're recording this bit of this episode of Newscast at 6:42 on Thursday evening. And Chris, the latest thing is that we've just seen the email that Lord Mandelson has sent to all his now ex-colleagues in the embassy in Washington, D.C.
We have, yeah. So these are the first words we've heard from him kind of in public since he was sacked. So he wrote to as the staff that he was working with in Washington, describing the job as the privilege of his life, talking about the circumstances around his departure being something he deeply regrets. He says, "I continue to feel awful about my association with Epstein 20 years ago and the plight of his victims." And then talks about the work that he has done and the relationship between Britain and the United States. But there he is. He's gone. He's only been there since February, and he's out of yet another senior government job.
And the decision to fire him was announced in a statement from the Foreign Office at mid-morning on Thursday, just before the Foreign Office Minister, Stephen Doughty, was due to appear in the House of Commons to answer an urgent question. And this is then how Stephen Doughty said it.
In light of additional information in emails written by Peter Mandelson, the Prime Minister has asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw him as ambassador to the United States. The emails show, Mr. Speaker, that the depth and extent of Lord Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment. In particular, Mr. Speaker, Lord Mandelson's suggestion that Jeffrey Epstein's first conviction was wrongful and should be challenged is new information. And in light of that, Mr. Speaker, and mindful, as we all are, of the victims of Epstein's appalling crimes, he has been withdrawn as ambassador with immediate effect.
So, Chris, what did we learn about the sequence of events that led to his, well, not normally big political figures sort of are allowed to resign, but he was actually dismissed?
Yeah. So, I mean, oh dear, it's a bit deja vu, really, with last week, in that you get the drip of revelations, and you get the Prime Minister saying he has full confidence, even though he doesn't have the full facts, and then the person goes. But yeah, in this instance, unlike last week with Angela Rayner, where she did resign, albeit she would have been sacked if she hadn't, it was a sacking for Lord Mandelson. The big thing that changed was not so much the interview that Harry Cole had done that we were reporting yesterday, The Sun and their YouTube interview. It was the detail that The Sun later published, and indeed Bloomberg, the news organisation, published around the emails between Lord Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein, more than 100 over a period of years. And crucially, that email from 2008, when Epstein was heading to prison for soliciting prostitution from a person under the age of 18. And the exchanges where Peter Mandelson is talking very sympathetically. And that is in the end what I think really people in government found utterly indefensible. This morning, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary met. Even the people who were out this morning in government, who were notionally trying to hold the government line that he was staying in post, were really struggling, to be quite frank. And then what was it? Just before 11 o'clock, he's gone.
And so basically this was then the culmination of Number 10 seeing these emails from Bloomberg and The Sun yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening on Wednesday, and then a meeting with the Foreign Secretary, who is technically was Lord Mandelson's boss, Yvette Cooper. And that's when the decision was made.
Yeah, and crucially with all of this is that Downing Street are arguing that the first they knew of the scale, the breadth, the frequency of the email exchanges between the two men, and specifically that detail relating to 2008, was when the rest of us did. That was something that they weren't aware of in the vetting processes that had gone on and the conversations that had gone on before Lord Mandelson was appointed, even though it was publicly known that the two men had a long-standing friendship. So the argument from within government is that is what changed the kind of the balance of their calculation, and that's why they believed it was utterly unsustainable for him to stay.
And also the building pressure from Labour backbenchers as well.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, to be fair, Peter Mandelson has always been a controversial figure amongst kind of the broad base of the Labour parliamentary party.
That's true. There's no doubt about that, and certainly, you know, some of those who were willing to go public in their condemnation of Lord Mandelson and indeed the decision to appoint him prior to the point of him being sacked were people broadly kind of the left of the party. Andy MacDonald, former Shadow Cabinet Minister, Belrabiro Addy, who was in the running for the deputy leadership. But what they were saying publicly was echoed pretty broadly privately. I think I said on Newscast last night that I'd bumped into a cabinet minister yesterday who was sort of open-mouthed when I talked them through what we knew, and that was before the revelations of yesterday evening. So in that sense, I think they were articulating out loud what others were saying privately, and had Lord Mandelson stayed in place or not been removed as quickly as he was, then I think we'd have seen more and more of that. So it would have become as well as a kind of moral question and judgment question, a party management question as well.
And what do allies of the Prime Minister, allies of Lord Mandelson, even his friends, say about the fact that lots of people knew that he was already friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and he'd already sort of expressed a kind of regret about that, and also just the fact that hiring Peter Mandelson was always a bit of a risk for the government because it was a non-traditional way of doing this hiring somebody for this role.
Yeah, I mean, utterly unconventional way to put a party grandee into arguably the most plum job on the diplomatic circuit, being the UK ambassador in Washington. Normally would be the kind of job that would go to perhaps a career civil servant diplomat who'd served in various other embassies or high commissions around the world at all sorts of different ranks, or worked in the bowels of the Foreign Office or whatever. So it's very rare in the British tradition for that kind of appointment to be made. On the specifics or the disjuncture, if you like, between, well, hang on a minute, how come it was known and publicly known of their friendship, Epstein and Lord Mandelson, and yet this has all now emerged and it's led to his sacking? I think that they are totally fair questions, and questions that when we get the chance to, because we've not seen the Prime Minister in front of the cameras today, will be asked about that, you know, that degree of scepticism and curiosity that he himself had, and then the successes or failures in the sort of pipeline of vetting that went on beforehand. I think if we take half a step back, there is clearly a difference between a known fact of a friendship and then getting a sense of its scale and its longevity, and then the human detail, the quotes back to that birthday greeting from 2003, best pal and yum yum and glorious homes and all that kind of thing. It's the detail proves deadly because it emphasizes in a way that is universally understood by anyone who sees or reads or hears this stuff the nature of that relationship. It is much harder to, I think, escape from or explain away. Now, Lord Mandelson and indeed the government argue that they didn't have access to these emails, that it was an old email account, so they didn't have access to these emails in order to come to a judgment in the first instance. What intrigues me, and we're sort of taking a look at, is, you know, in the whole vetting process, what would you, as a vetter, for want of a better word, realistically get to if you were sort of trawling around, particularly a sort of digital fingerprint stuff, if that particular email account was not drawn to your attention? Would you just come across it? But as I say, I think beyond that, there's then the question of the conversation that the Prime Minister and the former ambassador had prior to his appointment around, you know, particularly given A, the knowledge of the friendship, and then B, Lord Mandelson's pretty checkered history when it comes to taking on senior jobs in government and then losing them, having lost 2 cabinet jobs 20-odd years ago, of that sort of sense of, look, Peter, you know, you're wily when it comes to politics. We know about your friendship with Epstein. And you wonder the extent to which that conversation was as direct as that, and then how how direct it was, how candid it was in return, because that does, I think, lie at the heart of that kind of judgment question about his appointment in the first place.
And is it full steam ahead with Trump's state visit to the UK next week?
It is, yeah. So it is full steam ahead. The White House has acknowledged that. And I think as well, sort of full steam ahead within the Foreign Office and the wider government, trying to find another ambassador. And what's interesting, sort of keeping my ear to the ground on that, is that there is some talk about the logic of Dame Karen Pierce, the previous ambassador, who was there until February, and so was very much there in the build-up to the prospect of a potential second Trump administration, and then the transition team and all of that. You might recall the dinner that the Prime Minister and the then Foreign Secretary David Lammy had at Trump Tower. David Lammy talked about the extra chicken helping he'd had for ever and ever in the months after that. That happened when Karen Pierce was ambassador. So you can see a logic where she were to return and would be able to pick up where she sort of left off and have some established relationships, etc., etc. But obviously, no doubt there'll be others who would quite fancy that job as well. But I wonder the extent to which they are thinking about the imminence of that state visit in literally a matter of days, when conventionally the ambassador would be in the thick of that, including in public at various moments, and whether they seek to hurry something through quickly. That normally the cogs of kind of Whitehall and the Foreign Office would move more slowly than that, or with a conventional departure, you would know somebody was going, and so you could set a process in train in advance. Obviously, in this instance, it's all come along quite quickly.
And you can see that some people, their next sort of target in all of this is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, because he knew Peter Mandelson, and people are alleging that he was quite instrumental in his appointment.
Those questions will be asked for certain, and that is again comes back to that decision to send out a sort of sharply political appointee, if you like. Had it followed the usual recruitment for ambassadors, yes, they'll go through a sort of prime ministerial sign-off, etc., etc. But ultimately, it kind of follows the civil service machinations, and there's an element of distance. Professional distance between the Prime Minister and the ambassador, to such an extent that the British convention is that ambassadors stay the same when governments change political colour. And they are serving His Majesty's government, whoever happens to be in government. Clearly, that was very different around the appointment of Lord Mandelson, given his sort of Labour heritage and the connections that he had with senior figures in Downing Street, etc., etc. So yeah, that sharpens the judgment question and sharpens the kind of accountability questions in Downing Street. Yeah.
And Chris, in other news about the wider Labour family, it looks like the race to be the deputy leader of the party is going to be a two-horse one.
Yes. So at 4 minutes to 7, as it now is, we await the precise numbers. But
should we feel like you on the news channel in the old days?
Yeah, we could, couldn't we? We could just talk absolute
which is just unnecessary in a podcast.
3.5 minutes. Yeah, no, exactly. The numbers will be interesting up to a point, but actually it's the names that matter and the number of names. And it's going to be 2 names. It's going to be Bridget Phillipson. We know that for certain because she cleared the threshold comfortably in advance, the Education Secretary. And Lucy Powell, who was in government until last Friday, and then she was sacked in the reshuffle, and she is in the mix now in this contest. And what's fascinating, therefore, is that you have a government minister who, when she's out and about, is going to be loyal to the government. Then you have in Lucy Powell somebody who I think will make an argument that she could be a constructive critic. She won't, I wouldn't have thought, throw as many stones as some others within the parliamentary party would have been tempted to had they carried on in the race. But she has more latitude to say what she thinks because she's not in government anymore. So yeah, quite the contest really. You look at some of the polling that Labour List, the website, does. Bridget Phillipson's pretty popular with Labour members. But then, as I say, given that an element of this context is likely to be something of a referendum on Labour Party members' views about the government, then if you are a candidate who can express your view more freely, albeit you're still a Labour MP and you were in government until very recently and you won't want to be spectacularly disloyal, then maybe you have more scope for wooing those who are sceptical. So yeah, it'll be an interesting contest, even if it feels a little bit sort of sidebar, because what's the job all about when in this kind of situation? What's the difference between a deputy leader and the chairman of the Labour Party? If you're already in government as Bridget Phillipson is, does it mean all that much, particularly when there's already a deputy prime minister in David Lammy? So there's all those sort of questions about the extent to which what the role amounts to in the current kind of formulation. But nonetheless, an election's an election, and it'll be intriguing.
Yeah, they have their own dynamics.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely right.
And if Lucy Powell wins, imagine Keir Starmer finds a job in government and gives it to her, and then she's bound by collective responsibility, and so can't criticise the party even in a subtle way.
Yes.
Just putting it out there.
No, and then you have a time frame where she was in government, then she was sacked, then days later she runs for the deputy leadership, and then imagine this scenario plays out. She then wins the deputy leadership, and then, as you say, maybe gets a job in government again, and is almost back where she started, but with a different job title, or at least an additional job title, and a question about how you make the role work.
Yes. Right, Chris, thanks for all your hard work today.
Ta-ra, thank you.
And before I had my conversation with Chris, I recorded a conversation about the big news that broke in the USA after the last episode of Newscast on Wednesday evening, which was the fatal shooting of the right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk. So here's the conversation I had with two of the Newscast family about that. Well, Caitriona Perry is in Washington. Hello again, Caitriona.
Hi, Adam. Good to be here.
And here in the studio is Marianna Springs, social media investigations correspondent. Hello, Marianna.
Hello.
Now, I know you two have been on the airwaves quite a lot already today, answering people's questions about this. But Marianna, when people were messaging the news saying, actually, who was Charlie Kirk? Why do we care so much about him? What sort of things were you saying?
He is just so influential in the social media world and subsequently, sort of as a consequence, in the political world. He's someone who got into politics like when he was actually really quite young. When he was 18, he founded this Turning Point USA group, and he's been involved in political activism, including with that group, ever since. He's become most famous because of his associations with Donald Trump, and a lot of people, including, I think, some of the president's team and the president himself, see him as having been instrumental in Donald Trump's re-election, because he totally gets the alternative media sphere. He totally gets how you share content that will get recommended by the algorithms, that will often spark an emotional reaction, anger, upset, or maybe you love it, and it will pop up on the social media feeds of the kinds of voters you need to reach, particularly younger men and younger conservative men. And he just has a massive following. Like, he has millions and millions of followers across the platforms, and videos that are about him shared by other people get millions of views. And
I suppose the tricky thing from a British perspective is that there's no one the equivalent of him. There are people who sort of do similar things in the British political system, but nobody who's as huge or as influential or as beloved by their followers as he is or was.
Yeah, he's. I would say that in some ways Charlie Kirk was the sort of blueprint for this certain type of social media political activist, and therefore there isn't anyone quite like him. And actually, lots of people have kind of tried to follow in his footsteps in different ways, but he's so pervasive. And, even people in the UK, there will be Brits who see him all the time on their social media feeds. He's come over here to British universities. And I think the key to that, his influence, is his willingness to, whether you really hate his views or like them, his willingness to debate people. And it's those debate clips that go really viral. And even I've seen quite a lot of, for example, students who met him when he came over to university to debate them here, who really didn't agree with him, were debating him, arguing with him, but who were really sad about what's happened, because he was just a really important part of their understanding of the world and the US and politics.
And the whole point of this tour that he'd embarked on was to literally speak to his critics directly in a mass forum where everyone could join in and everyone could have a go or everyone could agree.
Yeah, and that's what he's, if you've ever seen him pop up on social media, that is usually the format it takes, people asking him questions and him responding. And I think part of that is about freedom of expression. It's that he is absolutely he's a freedom of speech absolutist. He is someone who thinks, whatever your views, you should be able to talk to people. And he's always been willing to hear other people's points of views or to debate them. It was really interesting that Gavin Newsom, for example, the Democrat who's the Californian governor, when he launched this new podcast, it was Charlie Kirk, who was the first person he doesn't agree with, quote unquote, who he decided to get to come on the podcast. But I think that it's that ability to, there's the freedom of expression thing, and then also knowing that debate and argument and all of that kind of stuff will be recommended by the algorithms, which is kind of how the social media platforms work.
And Caitriona, in terms of like the family tree, if you like, of the MAGA movement, I mean, many years ago he was right at the bottom of it, but actually over time he's moved right to the top of it.
He's basically like a cousin of the Trump family at this point. In fact, Donald Trump Jr. referred to him yesterday as being like a brother to him. JD Vance as well, very, very close friend. JD Vance put out a really long post on X, which I would encourage people to read, where he basically says that Charlie Kirk is the reason that he is the vice president today, and he's a very close friend, so close in fact that JD Vance cancelled his appearance at the 9/11 memorial service in New York to go instead to Utah to escort Charlie Kirk's remains from Utah back to Arizona with his now widow and 2 small children. So it's very difficult to overstate just how important Charlie Kirk is to this administration and to the wider kind of Trump family and the wider MAGA world as well. He has a movement, is how it's been described to me by so many of people within the administration. He has that youthful demographic, as Marianna was outlining there, and the president does credit him with helping him to get re-elected by securing that young vote, by letting him get his message across to young people, to, you know, as we hear from politicians all over the world, that's a really hard demographic to actually access, to go where they are, where they find their news and information. And Charlie Kirk was essentially the middleman for Donald Trump and for many others through his podcast and through his interactions to get to people who cared and who listened and in turn voted and supported the president and many others.
And Caitriona, where have we got to in terms of the law enforcement angle to this? Because I would have expected by now to have had lots of briefings with senior law enforcement people on the ground, but there seems to be very little of that.
Yeah, at the time that we're talking now, there have been 2 briefings from law enforcement authorities. They say they are tracking a person of interest at this point. They have, just before we started taping here, released some CCTV images of this individual. He's wearing sunglasses and dark clothing. It's quite hard to make out who he is. But they do say they're tracking him. They have a footprint. They have a forearm print. They've targeted a certain neighborhood close to the university where they've asked people to go back over if you have those doorbell video cameras, to go back over that and see if you have any images of this person getting through there. And that's where they're at the moment. They had earlier said they weren't looking for the public's help. They were confident in their own abilities to track him, but now they have sought the public's help. They do say, and you can see from that image that they've released, they have described him as a college-aged individual, and that he was able to blend in with the other students who were gathered on campus to get his way into this event. There were 3,000 people there, so quite a crowd in an open air amphitheatre, and that's how he got in, and crucially that's how he got out in the chaos afterwards.
And Marianna, in terms of how it played out on social media in the few hours after the incident, there was kind of 2 big things. A lot of conversation about trans rights. So just explain how that came about. And second of all, video itself of the shooting.
Yeah, so when it comes to the trans rights debate and discussion, obviously I guess the 2 things kind of connect to each other. So there's obviously been lots of clips of the shooting, mainly because it was students there. They're filming on their phones. Some of those clips are incredibly graphic when they show the moment that Charlie Kirk was shot. Just before that, though, he was asked a question about trans people carrying out shootings and what he thinks about that, relating to a previous shooting and the concern around that, essentially, and some of the comments that Charlie Kirk has made. He is very, very, very against people being transgender and has been very kind of critical of that. He's been accused of being transphobic in the past, and so on and so forth. And so there's been quite a lot of discussion around that, which has extended to people also speculating about the identity of the shooter, which we just don't know yet, as Caitriona was just explaining. And then when it comes to the footage itself, obviously it is It's very graphic. I think it helps us to understand why the reaction has been so visceral online from all sides, because it's very disturbing to watch. It's what, also because it's, if you think of Charlie Kirk as like a character, like this is him in his sort of home domain. Like he does this kind of stuff all the time. So you're like, oh, whoa, hang on. I normally watch clips of him just debating people. Why am I watching a clip of him being shot? And then I would say that, so you've got that layer of the content that came out last night. And then I'd say since then, you've almost got this gap between the different, well, you have got a gap between the different social media platforms. So on X, a lot of the conversation has been grief and condolences. Charlie Kirk obviously has 2 little children, a wife. It's really distressing for anyone who knows him personally. But then there's also been some really angry rhetoric, suggesting that left-wing people are responsible because they've been critical or abusive towards Charlie Kirk, and therefore that there should be some kind of retribution. Even people kind of using words like civil war, like really extreme language. Then on the other side, say on TikTok, you've had quite a lot of people who really don't like Charlie Kirk or Donald Trump very much, saying, well, this is kind of like you reap what you sow, this is what happens, which has again sparked loads and loads of criticism, and saying, well, you stoked the fire on the right with this kind of language, and that's why we've got here. And it feels like normally when something, well, not, I don't know, normally I feel like it's become a bit of a redundant word, but when stuff used to happen, everyone would kind of say, okay, maybe we all need to cool it down a bit and calm down. The problem is,
the baseline was tragedy.
Whereas you've had Donald Trump make some really pointed remarks about the role of left-wing rhetoric in creating this environment around someone like Charlie Kirk. The things he says are true, but, you've also got examples of where that rhetoric is used by the right directed at the left. And it just feels like it's heating up, and almost like America can no longer agree on the fact that whether you agree with someone or disagree with their views, they shouldn't be killed.
And Caitriona, I mean, the sad fact is that political violence has been a part of American life for decades.
It has. I mean, we saw a statement in response yesterday from the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I mean, he and his family know only too well about political violence in this country. And you only have to look back at the last, 14 months or so. The assassination attempt on President Trump last July in Butler, Pennsylvania. Another assassination attempt on him in September. That individual's trial is currently underway in Florida at this time. You had the Democratic lawmaker, the former Speaker of the Minnesota House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, Democrats, killed in their beds at home in June. And now here, and there have been numerous other attempts. The governor of Pennsylvania as well, there was an assassination attempt on him. There have been many, many other instances like this. It seems like they're happening more frequently in this country. Maybe it's the fact that we're more aware of them because, as Marianna has been discussing there, almost everything now involving people in the public eye is being live streamed or filmed. So you have hundreds, if not thousands, of video clips of things like that happening. But it's definitely, the rhetoric has increased, and unfortunately it would seem like the episodes of political violence have as well.
And is there now a conversation about gun control happening related to this? Because if there is, I've not really seen it playing out online.
No, there isn't, to be frank. I mean, there's an effort at it in a way, particularly from Democrats. But, Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, he said yesterday, if we're going to wait for the day when there's no one killed by a gun in this country to have a serious conversation about gun control, well, then that day will never come, because at least one, if not dozens of people are killed by guns every day. There was a shooting at a school in Colorado yesterday, for example, around the time that Charlie Kirk was shot. 2 students shot there. Now, they are alive, they haven't been killed, but the individual did die of a gunshot wound as well. So, the conversation about gun control, there's an effort to have that conversation, but on the Conservative or the Republican side, they don't see this as a gun control issue. They see this as a freedom of speech issue, as an effort to silence somebody that you don't agree with their rhetoric. There's always, as there was just in the last couple of weeks when we've had some other mass shooting events, an effort to talk about mental health, to talk about security on school and college campuses, whereas the Democrats always view it as it's an access issue. It's vetting of individuals to have access to gun control, and where that moves on from now. But there's there's just such a divergence of opinion, and how many times have we been at this place where a debate has been pledged and action has been pledged and change has been pledged, and it's yet to come.
But the fact is, in the state of Utah, you are allowed to carry a gun on a university campus, aren't you?
Yeah, it's an open carry state. So, you know, and that's just a fact of life there. And speaking to some eyewitnesses yesterday after this incident took place, you know, they were saying there was no security checks on the way into this event. Charlie Kirk does travel with his own security team. He's had many threats made against him and his life. So he does travel with his own security team. And in fact, they were the individuals who whipped him away in the aftermath into a private vehicle to bring him to hospital. We heard from the local police chief there saying that he had 6 officers on duty at this outdoor amphitheatre, and that there were some other plainclothes police officers as well. So, you know, it very much was not viewed as, it would appear, a major event with a huge security risk, that it was viewed as somebody coming to a college campus to engage in debate and talk to a vast majority of people who were there in support of him. There were a small number of protesters, but you get that at any event, right? But the vast majority of people were there welcoming him and wanted to hear what he had to say.
Marianna, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And Caitriona, thanks to you too.
Thank you.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. There'll be another one coming your way very soon. And I think we'll record it Friday lunchtime-ish, and we'll just look back at what does all the events of the last week or two mean for Keir Starmer's leadership and the state of the Labour Party, with 2 great political observers. So you will be able to download that on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts very soon. Bye-bye.